Good day and welcome to everyone. This is your host, Chuck Walkendorfer from Think2Perform, kicking off our Improved Decision Making and Stress Management series brought to you by First Citizens Bank. This is the first in a series of 12 webinars titled You First series, powered by Think2Perform. As I mentioned, my name is Chuck Walkendorfer. I'm your host. I am president of distribution at Think2Perform. Think2Perform is an 18-year-old business consulting firm. We work with executives, athletes, and business owners to improve decision-making under pressure. We have worked with everybody from the FBI to American Express, United Health Group, the Minnesota Vikings and Minnesota Twins to improve decision-making under pressure. And what you can know about performance in any area of life, I don't care what you do for a living, where you live, the color of your skin, it doesn't matter. Performance in any area of life is a function of three things. It's a function of our talent. So talent being things that we were always good at, can never really remember learning. So things like maybe math, music, sports, things that we had a natural affinity or ability for. Part number two of performance are skills. Skills are things we develop over our lifetime. So I may have had a talent for music, but I developed a skill to play the piano. And the third part of performance is decision making. So it's talent plus skill plus decision making equals performance. And of the three, decision making has twice the impact on our performance than talent and skill combined. I'm not suggesting that talent and skill don't matter. They just don't matter as much as decision making. And unlike our IQ, which we can't improve, fortunately, we can't get any smarter. We can, with practice and focus and effort, become better decision makers. And we make about 35,000 decisions a day. Does that surprise anybody? Most of those decisions we don't think about. So getting dressed in the morning, brushing our teeth, how we take our coffee. You know, when we used to drive to the office, we never really thought about driving to the office, right? And we don't have to make all 35,000 decisions a day better, but we've got to make probably less than a handful. And so this series around improving decision-making and stress management is brought to you by First Citizens because they want to give you some tools and skills that will help you deal with these uncertain times. And that is the topic of our first session here today, the certainty of uncertainty. I have 16 years with Think2Perform. I have a background in financial services. I spent 17 years with American Express. Over the last 16 years with Think2Perform, I have advised executives and business owners in the fields of financial services, banking, real estate, technology, retail, restaurants, you name it, all in an effort to improve their decision-making for themselves and their organizations. I'm also joined by my colleague, Dave Meldal. Dave is a senior vice president at Think2Perform, and he focuses his work on developing leaders and teams through deepened self-awareness, interpersonal effectiveness, and moral emotional competence. His clients are from a variety of industries, also including financial services, biotech, retail, government, and healthcare. Before joining Think2Perform, Dave ran his own coaching and training consulting firm for 6 years. Prior to entering consulting, Dave worked over the span of 24 years for American Express Financial Advisors, developing leaders and teams across the United States. As an adjunct faculty member, he also taught the Leadership Foundations course at Montana State University for several years. Thousands of leaders and training participants have put Dave's practical expertise and the insights he prompts into action. Dave has a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and Communications from Concordia in Moorhead, Minnesota, and a Master's in Education in Human Resource Development from the University of St. Thomas in Minneapolis. He and his beautiful wife, Cindy, live in a little slice of paradise in Bozeman, Montana. Please welcome Dave Meldal. Dave, great to have you with us today.
Thank you, Chuck. I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here with everyone. And when you said beautiful, that's true about my wife. And I'm also looking at these pictures on the screen going, that's one heck of a head of hair you've got, Chuck. And so I've got hair envy going on. I'll have to deal with that myself. But
unfortunately, that photo is probably about 4 or 5 years old. So my hair's a little grayer and I might be a little thinner. I'm just saying.
Well, the good thing I can say is I never have a bad hair day. So there.
There you go.
Huh.
Well, Dave, we are in some crazy times.
Yes.
Currently we're in the middle of this COVID crisis, which has affected the globe. In the United States, we also have some civil unrest, I think,
Yep.
with what's going on. Crazy, crazy stuff that I don't think we could have predicted, you know, 5, 6 months ago. I don't think any of us could have predicted what we're
No.
experiencing right now.
Right on. Right on.
So,
But that's why we're talking about this, right? It is right here. The things you mentioned, the pandemic, the global nature of that. There's kind of no one on the planet probably that isn't impacted in some way by this, just because of the intertwined nature of societies across the planet. And then, for good measure, we throw in some social unrest on top of it in the U.S. So that's the obvious, right? These are unprecedented times. And with that said, Chuck, the reality of life on Earth, I think, is that there is always going to be some degree of
mhm,
uncertainty,
right,
right, that we face, either collectively, like with market fluctuations, political tugs of war, uh, literally wars, and the like, or personally
right.
with such things as an unfortunate diagnosis of cancer or relationship challenges we have in our personal lives or career changes that we're
Yeah,
experiencing
job
or
uncertainty, right? Uncertainty with our children.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, these are unprecedented times, and yet they are also part of being human, it seems.
I was in a conversation here recently with a client of ours, and we were talking about what people are going through today compared to
Hmm.
probably the most recent meltdown we can all connect to, which was back in 2008 and 2009. And I
In terms of
think,
the markets, yeah.
yeah, I think in terms of what you were saying, back in '08 and '09, what we had was stock market uncertainty. And what we have now is stock market uncertainty, economic uncertainty, uncertainty in many of our jobs and careers, uncertainty in our family situation because we've got kids home now that we're either educating when school was going on, or now we're
Right.
not sending them to camp, so that changes our vacation plans and our work schedule. We may have parents that are affected in nursing homes. And so I think you're right. This is probably one of a handful of times in the last 100 years that what people decide to do with their lives and with their money is going to have a big impact on how much money they have moving forward.
Yep. Right
So
on.
what else should we be
Right
thinking
on.
about? Why else are we talking about this?
Well, another important reason I think to talk about this certainty of uncertainty is about what's going on in our brains, right? This is where it gets real personal, if you will. So what we know, Chuck, from the field of neuroscience is that our brain is constantly scanning the environment, right, for two things: opportunities and threats. And you threw out 35,000 decisions a day. Some sources will say we're taking in like 11 million bits of data a second, right?
Wow.
And most of that we're not even aware of, right? But
Mhm.
it's coming into us either sensory wise somehow. So amidst all of that, it's scanning, right, for opportunities and threats in our brain, among many things. But one of the things that it really likes is certainty,
Hmm.
the ability to predict things in our environment, because that allows it to put those predictable things, including our daily routines and things like making coffee or going to the restroom in the middle of the night, kind of into the background, if you will, and focus on processing more complicated tasks. So the brain doesn't want to think too hard about how to walk. So in other words, it's predicting, if
Hmm.
you will, that the floor is solid that I'm walking on. I'm certain that the floor is solid, so I can walk on it. It's not having to think about that. Or how am I going to make coffee this morning? It's not thinking about that. You mentioned driving to work in the morning. It's not thinking about that. That frees up resources, assuming it's not sensing any threats from walking or making the coffee or driving to work. It allows the brain to focus on a more complicated task or more complicated tasks, like preparing for the important meeting with the boss in an hour, or talking with a financial advisor about what to do financially to ensure our financial health. those more important, complicated tasks. But if a threat is detected and uncertainty feels like a threat to the brain, we're less able to focus effectively on preparing for those more complicated tasks.
Absolutely. So what I hear you saying is, back to the comment I made earlier about 35,000 decisions a day, we're not thinking about those 35,000 because those are on automatic pilot.
Right on.
It frees up normally my brain to think about the bigger issues of the day, like am I prepared for the meetings I've got? What time do I need to pick up my kids from school?
Yep.
But when my brain is sensing all kinds of threats from the level of uncertainty, it's taken like brain power
Right.
away from
Literally.
all the other things I've got to think
Literally.
about.
And the ripple effect, let's talk about that a bit. So when uncertainty rises and our brain senses that threat, what happens is our stress levels go up. So our bodies are reacting to this uncertainty by actually preparing to protect ourselves. So hormones like cortisol and adrenaline are released, and the emotional processing center of our brain, the amygdala, that most primitive part of our brain, kind of in the lower central base, is essentially, Chuck, in hyperdrive, right? Depending on where we're at with all this uncertainty, and we experience it differently, but just in general, making some general comments, that amygdala is firing a lot, right? It's kind of in hyperdrive because of this fear, this worry, this uncertainty, and it's essentially what it's doing. The brain is preparing us to fight or to flee, right? It's in that survival mode, the flight fight response that we've all heard of.
Isn't it true that doesn't our emotional brain actually shut off the logical part of our brain?
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Because all this energy, all this processing time is spent kind of worrying about and focused on this threat, that what happens is the prefrontal cortex, that part of our brain right behind the forehead, is what I call, it's kind of on the bench, right? It's not on the playing field, it's on the bench. And it's not, the coach isn't bringing it in. The coach is focused on survival, as
Right.
opposed to bringing in the part of our brain that will actually help think clearly. So what happens is we're in this emotional overdrive. So our ability to manage our emotions thoughtfully goes down. And as you said, the thinking part of our brain, that logical, rational prefrontal cortex processing part of our brain, that's kind of on the bench, right? So our decision-making ability goes down. And unfortunately, then some of the decisions that we make are also less effective in terms of how we're relating to other people. The decisions that we're making around our money, for example, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But our decision-making, which translates then to the behaviors, the choices we make moment to moment, day to day, is reduced. And that's an unfortunate ripple effect of what happens amidst all of this uncertainty.
Yeah, and so we've got to be, with all the uncertainty that we talked about a few minutes ago, for most people, I'm guessing their stress level is probably higher than it's been in a long time.
I would sure guess so.
Yeah.
I think if we looked at the stress level, we could measure the stress level of the country 6 months ago compared to now. Gosh, it's got to be significantly higher. And there are going to be pockets where it's more intense than others. And here I sit in Montana, where we're pretty fortunate to be less impacted. We are impacted, but less impacted than others. And yet this, again, we want to underscore the reality that this uncertainty that we're experiencing now is part of life, right? We label it COVID right now, or social unrest, but there are all sorts of other degrees of uncertainty and triggers of uncertainty that we all experience over time.
I know from my own work, I think to perform, when we get stressed, we tend to cut out things like exercise and meals, or we don't sleep as well, we work longer, we don't drink as much water as we should. And I think the reason First Citizens was wanting to bring this to our audience today is, for many of us, we can get by with that for a few days, maybe a week, but now we're into the third month of this COVID crisis, and we don't have an end in sight. And as you mentioned, we've got some additional unrest going on in the United States. Um, people are going to begin to drain their batteries over time if we don't do a better job of taking care of ourselves. So what can we do about all this going on, Dave? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think the headline there, Chuck, is taking back control. Thinking about the neuroscience piece of this again, which is so important. That if we can put back a bit of certainty back into the equation, that will be a good thing. But here, the first thing I guess I want to say is what you see on the screen. It's what we're experiencing collectively and individually is normal. So the fact that my stress is up and I'm a little bit more short with my wife or with my daughter who's quarantining with us from Colorado, that experience is normal, right? It's not like I'm off the rails. I'm not effective. I'm not as effective as I want to be.
Or maybe as you had been, right?
As I had been, right? But I think it's healthy just to acknowledge that this is normal and kind of cut ourselves some slack as we learn to work through this. And hopefully through this series that our participants will learn some tips, some techniques, some ways to manage the stress, to live through and cope with the certainty of uncertainty. So one is it's normal. As I mentioned a bit ago too, it's about looking for ways to increase that sense of security or certainty. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And what that does is it's a little bit of salve, or it's almost like a hug for our brain. To the extent that we can weave in even small little things, Chuck, make a difference. So using structure, for example, to our advantage, creating blocks of time where this is where I'm working, so I can focus on this, and maybe my spouse or significant other has the kids, or they're taking care of some things on the home front, or whatever, so I can focus on this. It's not necessarily like an 8 to 5 thing anymore. I might be working in the evening because I've got some things I got to do personally during the middle of the day, right? So it's just looking for that sense of certainty in my schedule. You mentioned exercise. Those sorts of routines give the brain a sense of, okay, there's some normalcy going on here. I'm doing the things that I would normally do, like exercise, scheduling time with friends and loved ones. Things essentially, Chuck, that are what things to look forward to, that we can count on happening. That is one way to take back some control. And then the controllables. When things seem so out of control, there's usually something about it that I can control. For example, very simple way to look at this is using weather, right? I cannot control the weather as much as, especially I'm going to be golfing this weekend, Chuck, and I want the weather to be really nice, but unfortunately I can't control that. But what I can control is what I wear, right? If it's going to be raining, I can make sure I've got my rain gear along. I can bundle up a little bit. We played in 45-degree weather last week at league. I can bundle up for that. And I'm reminded of that all the time when I think about this story, this experience I had last summer in Norway, visiting relatives for the first time. And my second cousin was tired of me whining about like one day out of a dozen that was bad weather, and I was whining. And she said, Dave, there's no such thing as bad weather. There's only bad clothing. It's like, yep, you're right.
Well, you know what it also reminds me of too, Dave, is back to your point around control. What is controllable is, if I know I'm going through a stressful time, as we all are now, what I want to do is, in order to build my stress capacity, is maybe get a little bit more rest, drink a little bit more water, get a little bit more exercise, because that helps me cope with stress.
Yeah.
So maybe I can't sleep, an extra hour or two each night, but I might be able to go to bed 15 minutes earlier. Maybe instead of drinking Diet Coke all day, I drink water, or I drink a couple glasses of water in the morning, a couple glasses in the afternoon, and maybe I can't go to the gym because the gym's not open.
Right.
But I work, I live on the 8th floor of my high-rise apartment building. I can, take the stairs instead of the elevator. Those are all little things I can be doing. Go for a walk outside at lunchtime. Eat a little bit healthier. Those are all things that we can do to take care of ourselves that are, as you said, within our control.
And financially, I think about, I can't control the stock market, and who knows what happened today. I think it was down significantly. Yesterday, 2 days ago, it was up big. I can't control those swings. But what about the stock market can I control? I can control who I seek advice from. And those, for those of you listening, your First Citizens advisor and the team of people behind that person are there to help support you with the certainty of uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
I can control where I spend my money, how I invest my money. So that saving and investing behavior, which we know has a significant impact on portfolio growth, I can control those behaviors on my part. Let's actually shift.
Especially with
Go
all
ahead,
the
Chuck.
money that we're not spending, going out to eat, going to games, going to concerts, going to the gym. I mean, for many of us, that's a huge chunk of what is now disposable income that we could be saving and investing and taking advantage of
Yes.
the fluctuations in the market. And those are things to be talking to your First Citizens wealth professional about. Is how can I manage with what I got? How can I put together a plan that helps me deal with the certainty of uncertainty?
Yes. And Chuck, given your background with financial advice, let's transition into this conversation around, well, two realities. One we've been talking about, right? The certainty of uncertainty. It's there, it's real, it's part of life, part of the human condition, if you will, living on this planet. The second is a very profound and simple philosophy around preparing people for that certainty of uncertainty in terms of their financial health. And your background, as I mentioned, is deep relative to supporting and helping people deal with the certainty of uncertainty financially. Talk with us, Chuck, about the smart money philosophy.
Absolutely, Dave. What we do know is what we don't know what's going to happen, right?
Yep.
So we can't predict the future. Nobody at First Citizens can predict the future. None of us listening to this session here today can predict the future, because if we could, we'd be on our own island somewhere and would be listening to the webinar today.
Yeah.
What we can do is prepare for the future, right? And what I do know, as I mentioned a minute ago, is I don't know what's going to happen. So the smart money philosophy prepares me for this not knowing what's going to happen. And it's about preparation, not prediction.
Mm.
And as you mentioned, it is profoundly simple. So it is profound in terms of its impact. It's simplicity on the other side of complexity, and simple and easy are not synonymous. So just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. And it's why working with your First Citizens professional will help you put this smart money philosophy into place. So I don't know how long I'm going to live. None of us does, right? I don't know if I'm going to live a long life or a short life. In the event I live a shorter life than I had anticipated, I can be prepared for that. How do I prepare for that? Well, I protect my family. I protect my loved ones. How do I do that? With things like life insurance. So if something unexpected happens to me, my family is not impacted negatively from a financial point of view. Now, I hope I live a long life, right? But what I don't know if I live a long life is I don't know if it's going to be a long, healthy life or a long, unhealthy life. If it's a long, unhealthy life affected by sickness or illness or injury, I can't work, I can't take care of myself, I can be prepared for that. How do I prepare for that? Well, things like disability income protection. If I'm unable to work, I have income coming in. If I'm unable to care for myself, I protect myself with things like long-term care. Or if I'm sick and in the hospital, I've got medical coverage. Those are things that prepare me for a long, unhealthy life. If I live a long, healthy life, it's going to be poor markets in a weak economy or strong markets in a good economy. So what helps me prepare for a poor market or a weak economy? things like cash reserves, things like fixed assets, like bonds or fixed annuities. If I've got strong markets and a good economy, the things I use are things that look like equities, real estate, or stocks or mutual funds. So no matter where or what happens in my life, when I need money, I can get it for whatever reason from a smart place. And I think for many people, unfortunately, over the last 3 or 4 years, or 3 or 4 months, not 3 or 4 years, thankfully, it feels like 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, it does.
We have realized that we have not been prepared for this certainty of uncertainty. Many people are realizing I'm exposed. And so now would be a great time to sit down with your First Citizens professional to address this smart money philosophy, to figure out, where are my gaps and what can I do about that, so that no matter what happens, whenever I need money for whatever reason, I've got a smart place to get it. That's the smart money philosophy.
Chuck, talk about personally, you had a friend that unfortunately passed away a while ago, and just as you experienced that, and in relation to the smart money philosophy, just talk with us a little bit about
Yeah,
how you view that.
I use a good friend of mine as an example to illustrate this, so that at least some good comes from his terribly unfortunate situation. I had a good friend of mine come down with stage 4 brain cancer about 2 years ago, and he passed away almost a year ago. And if stage 4 brain cancer weren't enough, at the time he was diagnosed, we also realized or learned that he had no life insurance, no disability income protection, and an unfunded buy-sell agreement for his business. So here we are 12 months after he passed away, and the only money that his widow and children have to live on is the equity in their home. And so they're struggling in this current economy with trying to sell their home, because that's the money that they have to live on. And I don't know the conversation that he had with his financial advisor. I don't know if he or she mentioned the smart money philosophy or talked about the impact of him passing away unexpectedly on his family. I don't know if he or she made recommendations that were not implemented, if she or he looked the other way. Nonetheless, the impact is significant and will be lasting on his wife, his widow, and his children. And so this has been something to me that personally highlights the significance of making sure that you're protected. My buddy Paul didn't expect to die at 58 years old.
No, of course not.
But he lived his life fairly dangerously. He was a risk taker.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean that he couldn't have prepared for this.
Right.
So this is the
well,
reason.
and then and preparation includes having a plan, right?
Yeah.
So you're planning for this certainty of uncertainty. So as you said, there's a smart place to get money when you need it, and the plan for all life's events is so critical to have.
And these are tough conversations to have, right? I mean, it's not easy thinking about, well, what if I'm not on the planet tomorrow, or what if I can't take care of myself? What if I can't work? But these are the tough conversations that your First Citizens professional will be having with you, because they have a responsibility to help you think through, so that no matter what happens in this uncertain world, these uncertain times we have, that you're prepared. So we want to thank everybody for their time and attention here today. Dave and I will be joining you for our second session, which is going to be focusing and going deeper on stress, and kind of helping you understand your own level of stress in your life and what you can begin to do about that. But the tools that we've given you here today is really to know that taking care of yourself is going to be most important in getting through this uncertain time, and that uncertainty will be with us, maybe not at the level it is today, but that we can do something about it by employing this smart money philosophy. So at least financially, no matter what happens, we're prepared for that. And you can seek out your First Citizens professional, your wealth advisor, to have this conversation. They are prepared to walk you through each of these alternatives. For Dave and I, it's been a pleasure to be with you here today, and we look forward to having you join us in our second session. Take care and be safe and healthy.